Welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth. This is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
This week we watched Season 1, Episode 16, Outlaws.
I think it's kind of surprising how much we both just love this episode. I mean, it's way better than even I remembered it. It's a great one.
And who do we have an interview with this week?
This week we're talking with Leonard Dick. He was the writer on this episode. He's not the writer on this episode. He wrote next week, so we'll hear from him about that one and a couple others he wrote. But yeah, he was one of the writers on the first couple seasons of the show.
Awesome. A quick note to our listeners about our current hosting situation. So you may have noticed that we have been off the air, so to speak, for a few weeks now. The reason we've done that is because I have moved. I now live in New Delhi, India. So hosting is going to be a bit of a logistical challenge, but...
It's a challenge we are ready to meet. We are up to the challenge for you, our listeners, and for ourselves.
As such, we start every episode with our hot takes on the episode. Sammy, what is your flaming hot take on Outlaws?
Oh gosh, this episode is so good. There's not a lot to flame on about. But I thought the story that Locke told was pretty interesting, where he was telling this story to Kate and Sawyer about his, that when one of his foster siblings died.
Oh, you thought that was interesting?
Okay, so I'm not saying that the story itself was interesting, but the moral of the story,
okay,
which Locke's moral was, it didn't, maybe it was or wasn't his sibling coming back, but what mattered is that his foster mother believed it. That sort of the objective reality didn't matter, but she believed it to be true, and so it was helpful for her and sort of helped her move on. I just thought that was interesting in terms of Locke's character and whether that says anything about, did the island heal him? Is he special? Is there some, reason why he is there and something he has to accomplish, for instance, opening the hatch?
But that didn't happen on the island.
It didn't, but I'm making a parallel. I'm trying to say that I thought the idea of what matters is that, he believes it to be true. And so I just wondered if, in some ways here, you get a little glimpse into how Locke is justifying to himself things that maybe in the world of objective reality don't make a lot of sense. That, if he believes them to be true, then they matter to him and they help him, be the person that he wants to be and do the things he wants to do.
Huh. Okay, you put a lot more stock in that scene than I did. That mostly sounded to me like Locke telling kind of a quaint, possibly apocryphal story that the point of the story was just the moral. It didn't even seem to me like it was necessarily true. It just was a story Locke wanted to tell in order to get his point across.
Maybe. I mean, the first time I watched it, it seemed like, why is this scene here? But then the second time I thought about it again, I thought, well, maybe that says something about what's going on in Locke's head. I don't know. It's that is my hot take. Take it or leave it. But that is what I'm thinking about. What is your hot take, Rosie?
The drinking game scene between Sawyer and Kate is possibly my favorite. I don't want to say it's my favorite in the series since we're so early, but it's very possibly my favorite thus far. They have such great chemistry. The acting, to the extent that I know about acting, is so good. It's shot in this beautiful, intimate way where it's just lit by the fire and the shots get increasingly tight on their faces as they sort of get more and more intimate. And then at the end, they both admit to having killed someone, which is A, a huge thing to admit, and B, sort of the point on which this episode turns. And then, there's no real positive resolution. They just sort of stare into the fire and the scene ends. But it's, so powerful and so well done. And I think Lost listeners probably across the spectrum are big fans of this. So I was happy that we got to return to it.
If you are not a big fan of that scene, please call us and give us a hot take and tell us why, because we super would be, concerned about why you didn't like that scene. It's so good, and you almost get the sense that you could just watch a whole episode of Kate and Sawyer sitting by the fire and building up to some dramatic conclusion.
Yeah, and then it ends up being a bit anticlimactic. They don't, not anticlimactic, but there is no sort of grand resolution. It just sort of fades out, which is nicely done, and I'm kind of glad they didn't go for the big tell-all moment. They just sort of let it burn down. Like the fire. Oh, couldn't escape the metaphor.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, as you alluded to earlier, we have a hot take from a listener.
Oh, great.
This listener is anonymous. Listener, we want to know your name. Call us back and let us know. Let's play it.
Hi, so I don't know if this is exactly a hot take. I mean, it seems somewhat obvious, but so in Outlaws, you have the flashback of Sawyer, killing the man that he thought was the real Sawyer before he got on the plane in Australia, and then in the present tense you have Charlie right after he killed Ethan and the aftermath of all that. And while the main thing about the episode is so important because you're focusing on Christian Shepherd and how they had that conversation and you start to learn more about Jack's backstory, I think you got to also remember how in that episode you've got Sawyer looking back on the murder he committed and how, he didn't exactly cope with that. Now he was still carrying that baggage, and how that was kind of making his character. And then you look at what was happening to Charlie in present time, and I think you got to make that connection for how they were doing that with the murder. So, I mean, that's about pretty much all I got, but awesome show. Keep it up. Thanks.
Yeah, I think this is a really astute point. And I actually listened to this take and then went back and watched the episode again with this framing, and it makes a lot of sense. Charlie, of course, coming off this very fresh experience of having, shot Ethan point blank and saying he feels nothing, but Hurley is out here wondering if he's got PTSD, and it's really quite heavy as he goes to work through this. And Sawyer, of course, is carrying literally this note and also the present of having tried to kill someone and thinking it was justified, but having failed. Which I think, we'll get into this more, but I think that's both a point of wounded pride for Sawyer. He thought he was settling this score he had waited decades to settle, and he failed to do that. And B, obviously, he killed a man who was, by all accounts, innocent, or at least did not deserve to die. He just owed this other guy money, and Sawyer was used.
Well, that is something I was wondering about, is which of those things weighs more heavily on Sawyer. Because on the one hand, the plot with the boar, I think, is intended to, I don't know, I guess you could take the boar storyline either way as to, what I mean is whether the boar storyline is supposed to tell us that Sawyer has now learned that, killing in order to relieve his suffering, as Christian would say, is a bad thing to do, or that killing the thing that is not actually the source of your problem is a bad thing to do. Because, Kate makes the point at the end, or in the drinking scene, I never blamed a boar for all my problems. So is the lesson that Sawyer learns here, the boar is not actually the source of my problems, I need to attack those directly, or killing is bad? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think the boar adds some much-needed levity to this episode. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, the boar's hilarious.
And, Kate and Saeed and others make no bones about just totally making fun of Sawyer.
It was staring at me. Then it came at me, so I hit it and ran off into the jungle.
With your top? Perhaps he wanted to go camping.
As far as what it's a metaphor for, because it's obviously a metaphor for something, I've been thinking about this for the last couple of weeks, and I don't really know what happens at the end when he decides not to kill the boar. I don't know whether we're supposed to see that as Sawyer letting go of what happened at the shrimp truck, or making sense of that, or letting go of his lifelong grudge.
Yeah.
Is that Sawyer saying, you know what I mean?
I do, and I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get at, because I think the parallel with the shrimp truck is, Sawyer kills the wrong guy, and so is he more upset that he killed... Because Christian says to him, if this is going to relieve your suffering, go do it. So is he upset that he got the wrong guy and didn't relieve his suffering, or is he, upset because he realized that going and, shooting the thing that he thinks is responsible for his suffering is actually the wrong idea? And I think that's a question with the boar as well.
And maybe we don't get to know. I've been wrestling with this for a few weeks every time I thought about this episode, and I think it's a combination of both things. I think we definitely see that Sawyer was torn up about having killed this man who he did not intend to kill, and sort of a personal feeling of betrayal, like, hey, this asshole stood me up and he made me kill this man for him, and that's, I was supposed to be relieved and I'm not. But then there's also, like, I don't know if we know after this episode if Sawyer would still kill other Sawyer given the chance.
Yeah, you're right. I think we don't, and I think, you look 2 seasons down the road and he does kill the actual Sawyer when given the chance, like, immediately. But in this moment, it's definitely a question.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, with Charlie, just to go back to the listeners thing, it's interesting that Charlie is going through all of this grief where, for a murder that at least I would say was arguably pretty justified. Or at least much more justified than what Sawyer's going through.
Yeah, I mean, Ethan, if we're playing, eye for an eye justice here, Ethan killed at least one member of their group. He kidnapped Claire. He tried to kill Charlie. Long list of sins.
Yeah. I know that you are, not that I'm not, but I know that you are, extremely anti-killing and anti-murder, and so I am curious.
Yes,
what you think
I'm anti-murder. I take that stance.
Yes, so and not saying I'm not, or nobody start thinking of blood or something, but I mean, arguably Ethan was probably, you could probably think he was going to go on killing even more of them.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm curious what you think of that, where Charlie is, having all of this doubt over doing something that he had, I think, every reason to want to do for the good of the group.
Yeah. Well, the way I would sort of turn that question back is, do you really believe that Charlie's conscience is clear? When he says, when Saeed goes to talk to him, and shout out to Hurley for, like, taking note of the mental health of the group and noticing that Charlie might be going through some stuff, which Hurley calls PTSD, who knows, and wisely seeks out Saeed, and Saeed goes and talks to him. And he says to Saeed, right, like, I did nothing wrong, he deserved to die. And Saeed's sort of tough love advice is...
You're not alone. Don't pretend to be.
Which is something else altogether, but... Like, is Charlie just saying, I don't feel bad because he needs to justify it to himself, or does he genuinely not feel bad?
I mean, it's hard to watch this and not think that he genuinely feels bad.
Right, I agree. In part because Charlie is one of the characters for whom, like, morality comes up again and again in his flashbacks. Like, we get a lot of church scenes with Charlie. We get a lot of, like, there's at least one scene where he's in confession, and... I
mean, and we have the whole storyline with Mr. Echo next season.
Yeah. But Charlie, one of the characters for whom religious morality seems to be a bigger player. And so I would interpret that to say that, yeah, he probably does feel like he did some sort of cosmic wrong, even if it was a justifiable right. And certainly nobody in the group is saying anything otherwise. There's nobody coming up to him and saying, what the hell, why did you kill that guy? But what do you think about Charlie?
It's tough. I mean, yeah, he definitely has this strong element of regret, which I totally didn't expect, because he seemed so, all of last episode, Homecoming, you can see it in his eye, like, he wants Ethan to die, and he wants to do it. He goes and he steals the gun, and, all sorts of things. And so I think that you're thinking here that this is, some deeper religious morality element inside Charlie that maybe he didn't even know was there.
Yeah.
Didn't think he would be feeling sort of comes out. So, and it's, Saeed, who continues to also be the best, in addition to Hurley noticing Charlie's mental health issue, is, I think it's just great for Saeed to be able to recognize, having been through situations like this, like, okay, Charlie's not just going to come out and say, I regret doing this, and I'm going to go and, comfort him regardless.
Right.
So the other line that you mentioned a minute ago that I thought was interesting is, you're not alone, don't pretend to be, which I just thought sort of spoke in an interesting way also to the I never scene with the lines we were talking about before, where Sawyer and Kate both acknowledge that they've killed someone, and that's the only thing that they have in common in the end in this game. And I just thought that moment was so interesting, where Sawyer says, I never killed a man, even though he has, and he waits to see what Kate does.
Right.
And she waits, and finally she drinks, and only after he sees that she's willing to admit that.
Does he confirm it? Yeah.
Does he confirm it and is also willing to admit it. So it's, it isn't, you got all these people who think that they're
they're
that they
alone.
have this unique situation.
Well,
that
and
they
even
did this
even
terrible
more
thing.
so with that, who is it who says? Is it Sawyer who says to Kate, like, "I never pretended I needed a favor to spend time with the only other person on the island who just doesn't belong,"
Yeah.
implying
Yeah,
that he and Kate, are
the only two people who don't belong.
together are two people who don't belong. They're not alone.
Yeah. But no, you're right. It's, I mean, I guess if you want to, do live together, die alone, it's like they've all got to realize that they're not alone. A
Right.
lot of them have done bad things. A lot of them feel like outcasts.
Well, and have been
in
alone
reality.
in their sort of earthly lives, right? Like certainly that's
True.
true of Saeed, and Charlie was very lonely. All of them were very lonely during their last days or weeks on, I want to say, on Earth, or like in reality, or
I was going to
to
say, you're talking about the island like it's not of Earth.
but you know what I mean, like in the real world.
I know. Yeah. No, and it's and it is interesting because ultimately, Sawyer and Kate, even if you want to, take at face value in this moment that they are, even, different kinds of outcasts than the rest of them, and bond because of that. It's like, eventually even Sawyer, who's the biggest outcast of all, he, befriends Jack and befriends the other people and cares about them, and, you start to see that in this episode where Sawyer realizes when he talks to Jack that he met Jack's dad, and he's not willing in that moment to, sort of extend the olive branch and tell Jack this profound thing that his dad says about him, but by the end of the season he does, and he shares that.
Yeah.
And so I think you start to see these people who feel like they're alone realizing that they're not over the course of, the season.
Well, and Sawyer, like, so this flashback with Christian is incredible, and
Oh, it's so good.
there's a lot to unpack there, but when the moment when Sawyer realizes that Jack is the son who Christian described is this holy shit moment, where your jaw kind of drops and you say, like, oh God, what's he going to do? Because Jack says the thing about the Sox winning the series, and it becomes apparent. And I think there's, I don't know if Sawyer doesn't say anything because he's not sure, or if he doesn't say anything because he's just being Sawyer and he's being a little bit malicious.
I think it's the latter.
But holy shit, I mean, the other thing, this is like apropos nothing, I just think it's an amazing scene in the flashback when they're sitting in the bar and Christian points to that payphone and he says, like, there's a phone right over there. I should go call my son. I should go tell him that, like, I respect him and I admire what he did and he did the right thing, and etc.
One simple phone call and I could fix everything. Why don't you? Because I am weak.
Damn if that isn't like this incisive moment of self-assessment and like truth-telling and incredible acknowledgement of your reality, and B, refusal to do anything about it. Like it's this brave moment of self-reflection, but it's also very cowardly in that he knows exactly what he should do and he won't do it.
I agree, and just to not let Christian off the hook even further, even though you just called him on the cowardice of it. The line that he has about some people are meant to suffer, which I also think is like a really key theme in this episode, where you have clearly with Sawyer, where he seems to think that he has to suffer. He takes on the name of the man who caused his parents to die and becomes a con man, and sort of in some ways seems to spend his whole life, you would maybe say, punishing himself. Like he feels like he deserves this, condemned existence. But, Christian says some people are meant to suffer. That's why the Sox will never win the damn series. And I think you know what I'm going to say here. What I love about this is this scene was taking place in the show in September 2004, which is a month before the Red Sox break the curse of the Bambino and win the World Series for the first time in 86 years. And, poor Christian, who doesn't live to see it. But obviously this...
Christian is dead and Jack is on the island.
That's right, and so Jack doesn't even know, which is terrible.
Yeah.
But, and this scene, obviously, this scene was written by the writers on the show knowing that the Red Sox have won the World Series, and it airs after that, so everyone who's watching it knows as well. And I think that really does a good job of, like, totally undermining in an intentional way this statement of some people are meant to suffer. It's like, no,
Right.
there was not a curse. the Red Sox got unlucky for a while, and then they won. And then they've won 2 more times since then also. So it's not that some people are meant to suffer. It's that, you've got to, I think, make a choice that you're not going to blame your suffering on a boar or, just say, I'm weak and shrug
And
your
that's
shoulders.
just the way it
It's
is.
like, you can... And that's just the way it is. No, like Christian could have gotten up and gone to that payphone. Sawyer could have put his past behind him and decided he was going to move forward. And that can be really hard, but you're not in this situation just because you're meant to suffer. And I think that line speaks to that a lot.
Yeah. Poetic, for sure.
If only the Dodgers could win the damn series.
This has been a very trying month for Sammy.
Yes, and in addition to Rosie moving to India and that causing some of our delay, it was also because I was just watching baseball every weekend.
Yeah.
But that is over now.
Yeah.
Anyway, do you...
Do we want to go to the interview?
Yeah, let's do it. So yeah, just to reintroduce, we have Leonard Dick on. He is he was a writer on the first 2 seasons, I believe, of the show. He wrote In Translation, which we'll watch soon, and he wrote The Greater Good with Saeed, which we'll watch in a couple weeks. And so this is sort of an introduction to Leonard and his involvement with the show.
Great, I can't wait to hear it.
All right, I'm here with Leonard Dick, writer from the first 2 seasons of Lost. He wrote In Translation and The Greater Good in Season 1 and a bunch of other episodes in Season 2. Leonard, thanks very much for talking to us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really honored to join you.
Well, great. So to get started, could you tell me a little bit about how you got involved with Lost?
Sure. Lost launched in the fall of 2004, and at the time I was actually working on another show. It was a CBS drama. And then in the middle of the season, there was some writer turnover at Lost, as happens on many shows. And the show I was on was struggling in the ratings, and it was looking like it was going to be canceled. And so Lost had some openings, and I was submitted to the show. I met with Carlton Cuse, Damon Lindelof, and received an offer. And then I came on board, and I hit the ground sprinting. They were already working on the next episode, and as happens with a lot of TV shows, they were a little bit behind, so it was a mad dash, but it was a lot of fun from the word go.
What was it like just sort of stepping into this juggernaut in the middle of the first year? Because, I mean, I'm sure you knew at the time that it was this phenomenon.
Yes, it's interesting because there's an old adage that people who work in television don't have time to watch television. So when the show first launched, I actually hadn't had a chance to see it because I was working very hard on the show I was on. My wife, meanwhile, watched it from day one, and she said, you have to watch the show. It's absolutely spectacular. And so I finally got around to watching it, and I thought it was fantastic. I thought my wife was spot on. And so I was a little bit nervous because the show had become a phenomenon very quickly. And what I found, it's the old story that everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time, and it ended up being just a really great group of people, and everyone was working their hardest to turn out a high quality TV show, and everybody was very welcoming. But the great news is really that because I hit the ground sprinting, I had to jump right in. There was really no time to learn where the figurative and literal coffee machine was. It was, okay, we have to break this episode, hop right in, and they welcomed my pitching. There was no, when you're new on a show, sometimes you feel that you should take a couple days, maybe learn how things work. Nope, this show, they wanted to hear your ideas. They were very welcoming, and I felt like one of the gang right from day one.
And so the first episode you worked on was In Translation?
That's the first one I actually wrote. The first episode I worked on that we were breaking at the time, I'm trying to remember. I joined during Special, but I think the one that we were working on at the time was Outlaws, which I think that's the one where Sawyer is attacked by the boar in his tent.
Ah, yes.
And so, which was a JJ idea. And so I went from working on a show based on a memoir about a bat boy for the New York Yankees to working on this mysterious island where one of the survivors is attacked by a boar. So it was a great way to flex a new creative muscle very, very quickly.
So you left after season 2, right?
I left after season 2, and then I worked on House for a few seasons, and that was it's interesting. That show ran very differently, the complete opposite end of how Lost ran. The David Shore, who created that show, Lost was a very writer's room intensive show. We broke all the stories in the writer's room. Everything was built in the writer's room. And then once the stories were fully fleshed out, whoever was assigned that episode would go off and write it first in outline form and then in script form. House was David Shore had come out of the Law and Order camp, and Law and Order, as you well know, those are standalone episodes. So what happens in episode 7 has no effect on episode 8, etc. So on a show like House, everybody worked on their stories individually. So instead of being in the writer's room all day, I spent most of my time in my office working on my episode, researching, talking to the doctors, beating it out. But I couldn't get the Lost out of my system. So I was constantly walking into my colleagues' offices. Hey, could you sit with me for half an hour? I'm kind of stuck in Act 2. Help me. And I would also love it when my colleagues would pull me in to work on their episodes, because that's what I had done on Lost. And I really love that dynamic.
Well, it's funny because I watched House as well, and the parts of that show that I enjoyed the most are the times when you guys were able to string sort of arcs together, like at the end of season 3 when the whole team quits and that plays out over like 4 or 5 weeks. Like, I thought that was when House was at its strongest, rather than it was just going week to week.
It's interesting, yeah. It speaks to really to the content of the show, and the heart of a House episode was the medical mystery. And that's where all the heavy lifting, individually as the writer of the episode, you would find your disease, you would do the research, you would talk to the doctors, and that took an immense amount of time. It would take a couple months to flesh out one episode. And then as a group, we would work on all the arc stuff together. We would meet a couple times a week, discuss where are we. And then what you would do invariably is try to graft on to the medical mystery the arc stories, the larger relationships, what's happening with, for example, replacing the team, and try to fit them organically. Sometimes what it would mean is the episode that was the medical mystery that was slated for episode 6 might play better in episode 5. So you'd flop those because thematically that character story fit better with whatever that medical mystery was. But whereas Lost was very serialized, and everything that happened and every move in episode 7 informed what was going to happen in episode 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, etc. In House, just the nature that it was a closed end medical mystery, the arc elements became a smaller percentage of what the episodes were.
That makes sense. So did you keep watching Lost after you went to work?
I did. I remained a fanboy. I watched it right to the end, and it was really fun for me because I knew where they were going for the next season plus, and then I watched it as a fan. I not knowing how it was going to end, and
you knew a little bit, I'm sure. A
little bit, but the who the new characters were. Again, it was. It's a testament to Carlton and Damon and JJ about being nimble and introducing new elements, and here's a cool character that maybe popped in an episode. So I watched it right to the end. I've remained a loyal. It's funny. I've remained a loyal corporate citizen. People always say to me, tell me, what was the real secret? What did you know? And I say, I will take everything I know to my grave, right? Also because if I ever revealed anything, I'm afraid that the lawyers from Disney would spur me away, and in a car you'd never hear from me again. But I've always remained very loyal to the top brass in the show. It was a really special time for me.
Was there ever anything when you were watching where you just wanted to reach out into the screen and make them do it differently?
No, because what I loved about the show, especially particularly after I left, was whenever they made a choice, they committed to the choice and they executed it and they followed that path. And so I always thought that Lost, one of the things that made Lost so good was that it was always compelling. Whenever they raised the mystery. Whenever the show raised a mystery, during my time there and after, there was always a very satisfying answer. The show never took the what I would call the cheap way out. So, for example, when that hatch opened, I'm sure most people were expecting tunnels or a treasure map, right? as a way to extend the mystery. No, there's a guy down there, and nobody's expecting that. And so, whether you liked the choice they made or didn't like a choice they made, the important thing is it was compelling and it was satisfying and it felt organic. They never took the cheap. They always found what was interesting. How can you find a cool left turn, and how can you make it organic to the larger whole of the show?
With one or two exceptions, I agree with you.
Yeah, in some ways I'm probably the wrong guy. I remain such a team guy, and again I feel
great.
Loyal to the show, loyal to Carlton and Damon and JJ and everyone I work with. Maybe it's my inner Canadian that I only see the good, but to me it was all good.
No, it's fine, and I have to ask you what you thought of the finale, but I'll preface it by saying that I personally loved the finale and think a lot of the criticism is silly, but I'm interested in what your take was.
I thought it was really inspired because to me the biggest takeaway from that finale was the last shot of Jack. And that's how the series began, and that's how the series ended. It felt poetic. It felt like genuine closure. And again, I thought the approach was very compelling. And of course, a lot of very interesting things had been seeded along the way. And so here's the reason I know it was compelling. I was sad. I was genuinely sad that Jack closes his eyes and dies. It was
Same.
Yeah, and so if you feel the loss of a fictional character on a television screen, that means that the creators have done something special. And it's not, it's very rare when you watch a show where you really do feel the loss of characters, and the end of a show. There are other shows that I have loved over the years whose endings I didn't necessarily like, and it's of course TV shows, it's all a matter of opinion, but there are a couple shows that I just over the years I thought had wonderful endings that were emotional, felt like a sense of closure, or felt really organic to what had been created and delivered over the previous seasons, and that's why I am a fan of how the show ended, and I was really moved by the final sequence.
No, I totally agree. It was the show was about people who had to find themselves and each other on an island, and in the end they had to do that again.
Yeah.
So Sammy, I know you were a really big House fan, and maybe probably still are. What stood out to you about what Leonard was saying there?
No, I just I thought it was interesting, his commentary about the the writers on House sort of going off on their on their own and working a lot more individually versus the collaborative nature on Lost. And I just think that on House, what I always enjoyed the most was when they managed to sort of string a bunch of good plot together that played out over a lot of episodes, which I'm sure took more collaboration. I kind of wish they had collaborated more, because I think you see on Lost it works so well where you sort of slowly see these stories play out over many episodes, and on House, to me, one of the frustrating things was how episodic it would be, when some of the strongest parts of the show I felt were when it was a little bit more serialized, like when the team left in season 3 and you got a bunch of episodes together. So I it's just interesting to see Leonard Dick, who's obviously a talented writer, having worked on both of these shows, that how different the end result could be if the writers are working together a lot more versus individually, I guess.
Right.
House is also a great show, just in a different way. Anyway, I think that's all for this week.
I think so too. As always, we love to hear from you. You can call and leave us your hot take by dialing 9546-DHARMA. It's a U.S. phone number, so if you're out of the country, go ahead and record a voice memo on your phone and just message that to our Facebook page. Next week, we're watching In Translation, so if you have specific takes on that episode, feel free to drop those.
And by the way, our Facebook page is facebook.com/TheHatchPodcast, on Twitter as well, @TheHatchPodcast. So please come follow us, tell us what you think. Rate and review us on iTunes. Helps more people find the show, and also it makes us happy.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen. Our cover art is by Danny Roth. Thanks for listening.
Namaste.